This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome. Join us on a captivating journey across the Iberian Peninsula, where Spain and Portugal, two nations born from shared ancient roots, forge dramatically different destinies. From their intertwined histories and fascinating linguistic nuances to their contrasting cultures and modern-day perceptions, we'll explore the intricate tapestry of how these close neighbors truly view each other. Prepare to uncover a story of kinship, rivalry, and evolving understanding. Chapter 1. Iberian Roots, Divergent Crowns. Imagine a landmass, sculpted by ancient forces and cradled by vast oceans, a crucible where cultures clashed and converged for millennia. This is the Iberian Peninsula, home to two nations whose destinies, though intricately linked, diverged dramatically over centuries: Spain and Portugal. Their story is not merely one of shared geography or linguistic kinship, but a compelling narrative of distinct paths forged from common origins, shaping identities that continue to resonate today. Our journey begins not with nations, but with a common tongue. Over 2 millennia ago, Roman legions marched across this peninsula, bringing with them not just their legions and laws, but also their language, vulgar Latin. This everyday speech, far from the formal classical Latin, laid the foundational linguistic bedrock for what would become both Spanish and Portuguese. Cities like Braga and Lisbon flourished under Roman rule, becoming centers of administration and culture, leaving an indelible mark that can still be traced in the very structure of their modern languages. For centuries, the peninsula was a relatively unified linguistic and cultural landscape under Rome's dominion. But empires rise and fall. As Rome's power waned, a new wave of influences swept across Iberia. Germanic tribes like the Suebi and Visigoths arrived, leaving their own subtle imprints, though their languages never fully supplanted the deeply rooted Latin. Then came the most transformative shift since the Romans, the Moorish invasion in 711 AD. For centuries, much of the Iberian Peninsula became Al-Andalus, a vibrant Islamic civilization. While this period introduced a wealth of Arabic vocabulary, particularly into the nascent Castilian dialects that would evolve into Spanish, Portuguese received significantly less Arabic influence, a factor that contributed to its earlier linguistic solidification. Words like aceituna, olive, and açúcar, sugar, are just a few examples of this rich linguistic inheritance. However, a crucial divergence began even amidst this shared experience. While the south of the peninsula thrived under Moorish rule, the rugged northern reaches remained Christian. From these pockets, a centuries-long struggle known as the Reconquista began, aimed at reclaiming the peninsula. This wasn't a unified Christian front, but a mosaic of emerging kingdoms, each with its own ambitions and trajectory. Portugal's path to nationhood was notably distinct. Its Reconquista was completed relatively early, in 1249, and its independence was formally recognized by Pope Alexander III in 1179. This earlier consolidation allowed its language, Galician Portuguese, to solidify into a distinct entity sooner than its eastern neighbor. The county of Portugal, centered around Portuscale, modern-day Porto, expanded southward, with figures like Afonso I, its first king, fiercely asserting independence even against his own mother. This early establishment of a sovereign state fostered a unique national identity, distinct from the larger kingdoms forming to its east. Portugal became one of Europe's oldest nation-states, with borders largely unchanged since 1297, a testament to its early and resolute independence. Meanwhile, the kingdoms that would form Spain underwent a longer, more complex process of unification. The marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile in 1469 was a pivotal moment, gradually bringing together disparate Christian realms. Their reconquista culminated dramatically in 1492 with the fall of Granada, the last Islamic stronghold. This year, etched into the annals of Spanish history, simultaneously marked the unification of Catholic Spain and the beginning of an entirely new chapter, the Age of Exploration. The Age of Exploration was perhaps the most significant period of divergence for these Iberian cousins. Portugal, having secured its borders, had already turned its gaze outward. Prince Henry the Navigator spearheaded an ambitious program of maritime exploration throughout the 1400s. Portuguese mariners pioneered routes along the African coast, establishing crucial trading posts and eventually reaching India and, by 1500, Brazil. Their global empire, though not vast in contiguous landmass, was a sprawling network of strategic islands and coastal ports, giving them unparalleled control over nautical trade routes. This era saw the tragic introduction of the African slave trade to the Atlantic world, with Portugal playing a pioneering and devastating role in its expansion, particularly for the sugar plantations on their Atlantic islands. Spain, newly unified and eager to assert its own global power, followed swiftly. Driven by rivalry with Portugal and a desire for commercial advantage and the spread of Catholicism, Ferdinand and Isabella sponsored Christopher Columbus's audacious westward voyage in 1492. His discovery of the Americas opened up a vast new theater for Spanish imperial ambitions. The burgeoning competition between the two powers was so intense that Pope Alexander VI intervened, leading to the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. This arbitrary line, drawn about halfway between the Cape Verde Islands, already Portuguese, and the islands claimed for Castile by Columbus, literally divided the non-European world into Spanish and Portuguese spheres of influence, solidifying their separate imperial trajectories and laying the groundwork for centuries of colonial expansion and, inevitably, conflict. The rivalry continued, often spilling into open conflict over territories in South America, Africa, and Asia. Yet there was one extraordinary period of forced unity, the Iberian Union from 1580 to 1640. Following a succession crisis, Philip II of Spain was crowned King of Portugal, creating a personal union of the two crowns. This period, however, was largely resented by the Portuguese, as it generated a decline of the Portuguese Empire. Their eventual restoration of independence in 1640 under the House of Braganza further cemented a distinct Portuguese identity, often defined in opposition to Spanish dominance. The subsequent centuries saw their paths continue to diverge. In the 18th century, Spain and Portugal frequently found themselves on opposite sides of European conflicts. Portugal allied with Great Britain, while Spain, through the Pacte de Famille, allied itself to France. This pattern of alliances reinforced their separate geopolitical interests and cultural leanings. The Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century brought further upheaval. When French and Spanish forces invaded Portugal, the Portuguese royal family famously fled to Brazil, shifting the heart of their empire across the Atlantic and paving the way for Brazil's eventual independence. Even in the 20th century, their destinies, though seemingly parallel with the rise of right-leaning authoritarian regimes, Salazar's Estado Novo in Portugal and Franco's dictatorship in Spain, maintained their distinct characteristics. Portugal's membership in NATO as a founding member, for instance, made it less isolated than its counterpart, Spain, which was unable to join NATO initially. Portugal's Carnation Revolution in 1974 brought a peaceful transition to democracy, preceding Spain's own return to constitutional monarchy after Franco's death in 1975. Both then embarked on paths of economic liberalization and eventually joined the European Economic Community in 1986, but as two mature, independent nations, each having carved out its own unique place in the modern world. This shared past, marked by Roman influence, Moorish presence, and the crucible of the Reconquista, gave way to profoundly divergent destinies shaped by early nation-building, global exploration, and centuries of rivalry and distinct alliances. These historical forces didn't just carve out political boundaries, they deeply influenced the very temperaments and perceptions that Spaniards and Portuguese hold of each other, fostering distinct national identities and, at times, contrasting views. This historical journey from a common Iberian root to distinct national trees raises a profound question. How deeply do these divergent destinies truly separate the hearts and minds of the Spanish and Portuguese people today? Chapter 2: Whispers and Shouts. The Iberian Language Divide. Imagine a conversation across an invisible border, where two people speak different languages, yet somehow they almost understand each other. This is the captivating, often perplexing, dynamic between Spanish and Portuguese. On the surface, these two Romance languages, born from the same Latin lineage, appear to be linguistic siblings, sharing a remarkable 89 to 90% lexical similarity. Glance at a written newspaper from Lisbon and one from Madrid, and you'll find countless words that look nearly identical, inviting the assumption that communication should flow effortlessly. Yet beneath this veneer of familiarity lies an intricate, often asymmetric, dance of mutual intelligibility and misunderstanding. The initial impression of effortless comprehension quickly dissolves when speakers of Spanish and Portuguese attempt a spoken conversation. While reading a text in the other language can yield a high degree of understanding, up to 80 or 90% for an educated speaker, listening and speaking present a far greater challenge. And here lies the surprising asymmetry. Portuguese speakers generally find it significantly easier to understand spoken Spanish than Spanish speakers do with spoken Portuguese. This isn't just anecdotal. Studies have shown Portuguese speakers grasping around 50 to 58% of spoken Spanish, while Spanish speakers often struggle with approximately 50% of spoken Portuguese. Why this one-sided advantage? The answer lies largely in the subtle yet profound differences in their sound systems or phonology. Spanish is often described as a more transparent language phonetically. What you see is largely what you get. Its 5 clear, stable vowel sounds are pronounced consistently, regardless of their position in a word. This straightforwardness makes Spanish relatively easy for outsiders to parse. Furthermore, Spanish has undergone a simplification over centuries, for instance, evolving the Latin F sound into an H sound, as seen in hijo, son, from the Latin filius.
Portuguese, however, is a different beast entirely. It possesses a mais complex sound system. It retains certain archaic features que Spanish has simplified over centuries the evolution. While Spanish has only 5 vowel sounds, Portuguese features up to 14, incluindo distintivo array de nasal vowels. Words like mau for hand or pau for bread carry a nasal quality that simply doesn't exist in Spanish phonology. For a Spanish speaker accustomed to crisp oral vowels, these nasal sounds can be utterly alien, making familiar-looking words sound completely foreign. It's akin to a musician trained only on a piano trying to decipher the complex harmonies of an orchestra. The basic notes are there, but the added layers and textures are unfamiliar. Furthermore, European Portuguese in particular exhibits some phenomenon known as vowel reduction. Unstressed vowels can be compressed or even eaten, making words sound shorter and more mumbled to an untrained ear. For instance, the word telefone might sound more like téléphone in casual European Portuguese speech. This compression, combined with its stress-timed rhythm, where some syllables are barely pronounced, stands in stark contrast to Spanish's syllable-timed rhythm, where every syllable is typically articulated clearly. This makes real-time comprehension a significant hurdle for Spanish speakers. This complexity is further highlighted by its retention of the Latin F sound, as in filio, son, where Spanish evolved to her. Beyond vowels, consonants also play their part in this linguistic maze. Portuguese features sibilant sounds that are distinct from Spanish.
The S at the end of a word, for example, often takes on a sh sound in European Portuguese, while in Spanish it remains a clear S. Brazilian Portuguese introduces a ZH sound, like the S in measure, for J or G before E and I, a sound absent in Spanish. Compare the Portuguese gente with the Spanish gente, people. The initial sound is entirely different. These phonetic nuances are further complicated by specific sound-to-letter mappings that differ significantly. For instance, the Portuguese NH sound is akin to the Spanish ñ, while LH often corresponds to Spanish LL or y. The common Portuguese suffix cao translates to the Spanish sion. These seemingly minor phonetic and orthographic variations accumulate to create a soundscape that can be baffling for a Spanish speaker whose ear is not accustomed to such variations. In essence, Portuguese speakers are already trained to recognize and produce a wider range of sounds, encompassing most of what Spanish offers, plus their own unique elements. This broader phonetic toolkit gives them an inherent advantage when encountering Spanish. The disparity in exposure also plays a crucial role in this asymmetric understanding. Spanish, with its global reach of over 500 million speakers, dominates much of Latin American media. Portuguese speakers, particularly Brazilians, often grow up watching Spanish telenovelas or listening to reggaeton without subtitles, naturally attuning their ears to the rhythms and sounds of Spanish. Conversely, Spanish speakers have far less organic exposure to Portuguese media, leading to a lesser familiarity with its distinctive phonology. This constant, often subconscious immersion for Portuguese speakers acts as a natural training ground for Spanish sounds, while Spanish speakers lack a similar widespread exposure to the nuances of Portuguese. A Spanish speaker might visit Lisbon and find themselves adrift in a sea of unfamiliar sounds, while a Portuguese speaker in Madrid might navigate conversations with surprising ease.
Beyond pronunciation, vocabulary presents its own set of fascinating traps and divergences. While the lexical similarity is high, the devil is in the details, particularly with false friends, words that look and sound alike but carry entirely different meanings. These linguistic landmines can lead to amusing or sometimes awkward misunderstandings. Consider the classic example of embarazada. In Spanish, it means pregnant. A Portuguese speaker, encountering the similar-looking embaracada, might assume it means the same. But in Portuguese, it means embarrassed or entangled. Imagine the confusion if a Spanish speaker, trying to express discomfort, accidentally announces a pregnancy to a Portuguese acquaintance. Similarly, the Spanish oficina refers to an office, but its Portuguese cognate, oficina, means workshop or even an auto repair shop. A Spanish business person seeking their office in Portugal might find themselves directed to a garage. Other notable false friends include the Spanish rato, meaning a short while the Portuguese rato is a mouse. The Spanish aceite is general oil, but Portuguese azeite specifically means olive oil. The Spanish largo means long, but the Portuguese largo means wide. The Spanish cola can mean tail or glue, but in Portuguese it's a queue. A Spanish vaso is a drinking glass, while Portuguese vaso is a flower pot. And for a splash of color, the Spanish rojo, red, becomes a curious purple in Portuguese as roxo, with red being vermelho. These are just a few examples of how seemingly familiar words can lead to complete miscommunication, transforming recognition into utter bewilderment.
Even when words are not false friends, many common high-frequency words are simply different. A Spanish speaker might ask for pollo, chicken, while a Portuguese speaker uses frango. Red is rojo in Spanish, but vermelho in Portuguese. Oil is aceite in Spanish and oleo in Portuguese. Dog is perro in Spanish, but cao or cachorro in Portuguese. Street is calle in Spanish, but rua in Portuguese. Me is rodilla in Spanish, but joelho in Portuguese. These everyday lexical divergences mean that even with a high overall cognate count, a significant portion of daily conversation can be peppered with unfamiliar terms, demanding constant mental translation or inference. Grammar, while broadly similar in structure, both are Romance languages with gendered nouns, verb conjugations, and a subject-verb-object-word order, also hold subtle distinctions that can trip up speakers. Take the seemingly simple concept of very or much. Spanish distinguishes between muy, very/quite, used with adjectives and adverbs, and mucho, much/many, used with nouns or after verbs. Portuguese simplifies this with a single word, muito, for all these uses. Similarly, Spanish uses todo for both all/every and everything, while Portuguese differentiates with todo, masculine, all/every, and tudo, neuter, everything. Beyond these, more intricate grammatical divergences exist. For relative and interrogative pronouns, Spanish uses acute accents to distinguish interrogatives, quién, who, from relative pronouns, quién, who, whom, and also inflects for number, quién, quiénes. Portuguese, however, uses quem for both, and it remains invariable. Cardinal numbers also show differences. Portuguese inflects dois, duas for gender, two, while Spanish dos is invariable. Spanish uno can function as a generic pronoun, a role for which Portuguese typically employs se. Conjunctions present another subtle hurdle. Spanish ye changes to e before I or his sounds, and o changes to u before o or ho sounds, whereas Portuguese e and ou remain consistent regardless of the following sound. Reflexive pronouns also have unique rules. Spanish les change to se before direct object pronouns like lo, la, los, las. Perhaps one of the most significant structural differences is the Portuguese personal infinitive, a verb form that does not exist in Spanish. For example, for them to do would be para eles fazerem in Portuguese, but para que ellos hagan using the subjunctive in Spanish. These nuances, though seemingly minor, accumulate to create distinct grammatical patterns that require careful attention. Dialectal variations further complicate the picture. For Spanish speakers, Brazilian Portuguese often proves easier to understand than European Portuguese. Brazilian Portuguese tends to have more open vowels and a clearer articulation, which resonates more with the Spanish ear. European Portuguese, on the other hand, with its compressed vowels and more muffled sound, can be particularly challenging for newcomers. Conversely, some rapid Spanish dialects, such as those found in the Caribbean or Andalusia, can present initial difficulties for Portuguese speakers. Yet, regional proximity can bridge some gaps. Speakers in Galicia, a region in northwest Spain, find a much higher degree of intelligibility with Portuguese due to their shared linguistic heritage. Ultimately, the linguistic relationship between Spanish and Portuguese is a testament to the complex journey of language evolution. What appears to be a clear shared path on paper becomes a nuanced asymmetric dance in spoken interaction. The initial promise of easy mutual understanding often gives way to a realization that true comprehension requires conscious effort, exposure, and a willingness to navigate a fascinating landscape of phonetic hurdles, deceptive vocabulary, and grammatical quirks. This constant negotiation of linguistic closeness and distance shapes not only how these two nations communicate, but also how they perceive the very essence of their Iberian kinship. How do these deep-seated linguistic differences and the often frustrating asymmetry of understanding translate into the broader cultural perceptions and interactions between these two intertwined nations?
Chapter 3. Cultural Rhythms and Echoes. Continuing our exploration of Iberian culture, we move beyond the linguistic landscape. In our last chapter, we untangled the fascinating, yet often tricky, linguistic dance between Spanish and Portuguese.
We discovered that while their written forms are like open books to each other, spoken communication reveals a complex, often asymmetric puzzle of sounds and meanings. But language, as we know, is merely one thread in the rich tapestry of a nation's identity. Today, we journey beyond the tongue, into the very heart of their cultures, to explore the echoes and rhythms that define how these two peoples see themselves, and, crucially, how they perceive their Iberian neighbor. Imagine two close relatives living side by side for centuries, sharing a common ancestry, yet developing distinct personalities and habits. This is the essence of the Spanish and Portuguese relationship. These differences, far from being superficial, permeate daily life, social interactions, and even national temperament. One of the most striking, yet often overlooked cultural distinctions lies in their very perception of time and daily rhythm. Picture this. In Portugal, the day begins an hour earlier than in Spain, save for the Canary Islands. This isn't a mere quirk of geography, it's a deliberate historical choice. Portugal, positioned on the western edge of Europe, opted to align with Western European time, recognizing the importance of synchronizing with the solar cycle for public health and well-being. Spain, on the other hand, made a different decision in 1940. While geographically it would also have fallen into the Western European time zone, Spain chose to align with Central European time, following countries like Italy and Germany. This choice has profoundly shaped its daily schedule. This means that while a Portuguese person might be sitting down to lunch around 1 p.m., their Spanish counterpart is still an hour away from even considering it, often not eating until 3 p.m., with dinner stretching to 9 or 10 p.m. This later dining schedule, a long-established custom in Spain, is often seen as too late by the Portuguese, highlighting a fundamental difference in their approach to the day, a subtle but persistent contrasting rhythm in their very existence. Social customs, too, reveal these fascinating divergences. Consider the simple act of greeting. In Spain, men typically shake hands as a formal salutation. Cross the border into Portugal, however, and you'll find a warmer, more effusive embrace, with men commonly exchanging a big hug. For women in both nations, 2 kisses on the cheek are the norm, a gesture of familiarity and affection. Yet even here, a subtle difference persists. In Portugal, the kisses are exchanged from right to left, while in Spain, the direction is reversed. These seemingly minor variations speak volumes about underlying social codes and the perceived boundaries of personal space and intimacy. The role of formality in social and professional interactions also sets them apart. In Portugal, particularly in professional environments, there's a strong tradition of addressing individuals by their academic titles, such as Mr. Doctor or Mr. Engineer, especially for graduates. While this custom is gradually becoming less prevalent, its lingering presence reflects a cultural emphasis on respect for achievement and hierarchy. Spain, in contrast, leans towards a more informal approach. The familiar tu is widely used, often without much consideration for one's position or educational background. This difference can lead to amusing or sometimes awkward encounters when a Portuguese visitor accustomed to deference is met with casual familiarity in Spain or vice versa. Beyond the dinner table and social greetings, their very temperaments are often perceived as contrasting. The Portuguese are frequently described as more reserved, less loud, and perhaps carrying a certain melancholic introspection. As one observer noted, Portuguese are definitely more depressed than Spanish or Italians. Also not as loud, which I appreciate. This reservedness doesn't equate to coldness. Rather, it's often linked to a perception of being more honest, friendly, welcoming, and caring. The analogy of each Portuguese person carrying a cross on their back, like Atlas bearing the weight of the world, paints a vivid picture of a deeply thoughtful, perhaps burdened, national character. This is often contrasted with a perceived island mentality, a sense of self-containment despite their continental location. The Spanish, on the other hand, are often characterized as louder, more smiley, and possessing a more carefree attitude. As one user observed, they seem less reserved, more open-minded, more direct. They seem to enjoy more life, regardless of their social status, than the Portuguese. This lively expressiveness, while often admired, can sometimes be perceived by the Portuguese as volatile in temperament. This perceived Spanish preeminence is sometimes expressed as a belief that Spain does everything better: better food, better-looking women, better wine. It's a classic contrast, the introspective and the extroverted, the quiet observer versus the boisterous participant. These deeply ingrained perceptions of national personality contribute significantly to how each nation views the other.
Even their internal cultural landscapes present a contrast. Spain, a significantly larger country, boasts immense regional diversity. From the distinct linguistic and cultural identities of Catalonia and the Basque Country to the unique flavors of Andalusia and Galicia, Spain is a mosaic of different peoples and traditions. This internal heterogeneity means that a Spaniard from Catalonia might feel a stronger affinity with France due to proximity and historical ties, as one person noted. People from Catalonia probably are more interested in France because they are nearer. This rich tapestry of regional identities often means that the overarching Spanish identity is itself a complex negotiation of these varied parts. Portugal, while certainly having regional nuances, presents a more cohesive national identity. As one Portuguese individual pointed out, yes, everyone feels and identifies as Portuguese first and foremost. There's no regional identity that supersedes the national one. This sense of unity, perhaps forged by its early consolidation as a nation-state and its long history of defending its borders, stands in subtle contrast to Spain's more federalized cultural landscape.
Food culture, a cornerstone of Iberian life, also offers its own contrasting rhythms. While both nations share a love for fresh ingredients and bold flavors, the Spanish tradition of tapas, small plates, often served free with drinks, is a social ritual deeply embedded in their communal dining. In Portugal, while snacks are often brought to the table by waiters, they are typically charged for and will appear on the final bill unless explicitly sent back. This difference, while seemingly minor, speaks to differing expectations of hospitality and the economics of social eating. And for a culinary curiosity, Portuguese cuisine is notably saltier than its Spanish counterpart, a detail that has even prompted specific guides like "Why is Portuguese food so salty?" These deeply etched cultural rhythms, the subtle contrasts in daily life, and the profound differences in national temperament all contribute to a complex, often unspoken, dialogue between Spain and Portugal. They form the bedrock upon which shared understanding is built, or sometimes stumbles. But what happens when these cultural echoes transform into something more rigid, more defined, perhaps even distorted? What happens when these contrasting rhythms become the very basis of how one cousin sees the other, not as they truly are, but through the lens of a caricature?
Chapter 4. Iberian Mirrors, Stereotypes and Self-Perceptions. What happens when the complex reality of a neighbor transforms into a simplified, often unfair caricature? This is the realm of stereotypes and nicknames, where perceptions, both playful and poignant, take root, shaping how Portuguese and Spanish people view each other, sometimes eclipsing the deeper truths. For many Spaniards, the prevailing sentiment towards Portugal has, at times, been one of benign neglect, bordering on outright ignorance. It's a dynamic frequently articulated by the Portuguese themselves, the feeling of being an invisible neighbor. Spanish media, for instance, is often critiqued for its conspicuous silence on Portuguese affairs, rarely featuring news from across the border unless it involves a major international event like football or a Spanish person. As one Portuguese observer lamented, an explosion in a Spanish city like Girona would make Portuguese headlines, but a similar event in a Portuguese city like Évora would likely go unnoticed in Spain. The invisible neighbor concept is powerfully illustrated by a common anecdote. It's like your older sibling enters the kitchen, sees you, and just walks past you to get a glass of water.
not even acknowledging you were there. That's how Spain treats Portugal.
This perception isn't entirely lost on Spaniards themselves, who have coined phrases and titles reflecting this awareness. Poca información sobre Portugal en los medios en España. ¿Por qué España ignora a Portugal? Ese vecino transparente. This perceived indifference solidifies the stereotype of Portugal as Spain's transparent neighbor, a country that, in the Spanish mind, doesn't exist or is largely out of mind, out of sight, unless geography demands otherwise. The depth of this ignorance can be surprising. One Portuguese person recalled, nearly half of my classmates in senior year of high school had no idea that Portugal had another time zone, underscoring how fundamental geographical facts about their neighbor can be unknown. This historical imbalance of attention has, unfortunately, fostered a sense of Spanish condescension. There's been a tendency in Spain to view Portugal in a condescending manner, as if their country was not as developed as ours. This attitude, while perhaps not universally held today, echoes a historical superiority complex where the larger, more powerful Spain has, at times, looked down upon its smaller Western neighbor. This reveals an underlying belief in Spanish preeminence. This condescension manifests in specific, albeit often light-hearted, caricatures. Among the more enduring Spanish jokes about the Portuguese are the notions that they sell towels and that their women have mustaches. These seemingly innocuous jests, repeated in various forms, reduce a nation and its people to simplistic, somewhat belittling images. The towels stereotype likely plays on the traditional image of Portuguese street vendors, or perhaps a perceived economic simplicity, while the mustaches joke is a crude gendered jab designed to mock. Such stereotypes, whether whispered or openly shared, serve to create a comfortable distance, reinforcing a sense of otherness that prevents a deeper, more empathetic understanding. And to be fair, Spaniards also engage in self-deprecating humor about their own stereotypes, joking, "We bullfight each day, and mountain wear traditional Sevillana dresses to work and to school. We even go to sleep in Sevillana dresses."
Adding to this perceived Spanish ignorance is the stark contrast in educational priorities. While Spanish is widely taught as an optional language in Portuguese high schools, with increasing numbers of students eager to learn it, Portuguese is notably absent from the nationwide curriculum in Spanish high schools. Instead, the Spanish educational system prioritizes languages like Italian and German. This perceived indifference is sometimes rooted in Spain's own historical and cultural leanings, with some Spaniards feeling a stronger affinity with Italians due to historical ties of Eastern/Mediterranean Spain with Italy, which helps contextualize why their educational priorities might overlook their Western neighbor. This oversight, from a Portuguese perspective, is not merely an administrative detail. It's a powerful symbol of being overlooked, of being the little sibling that the older sibling, Spain, tends to mostly ignore. It reinforces the idea that Spanish indifference is rooted in ignorance, perpetuated by a lack of interest from Spanish media and government. This feeling of being overlooked makes even small gestures of recognition deeply meaningful. One Portuguese individual recounted their excitement when a Spaniard knew about francesinha, a famous Porto sandwich. "I was so happy, I almost cried. It's such a small thing, but it means a lot when they know something about us."
From the Portuguese side, the view of their Spanish neighbors is equally complex, often tinged with a blend of historical wariness and a fascination with their perceived volatile temperament. While acknowledging a certain kinship, especially at an individual level, some Portuguese express that they cannot stand the Spanish as a collective. This sentiment often stems from a perception of Spanish behavior and personality that contrasts sharply with their own self-image, but also from a deeper historical wellspring. As one Portuguese individual explained, because of the wars between our countries, the Portuguese developed antipathy towards Spain, although not the Spanish on an individual level.
Yet this collective sentiment often gives way to warmth on an individual level. Many Spaniards readily affirm that Portuguese are nice, and when we travel abroad, we are like brothers, highlighting a personal kinship that transcends national caricatures. However, not all Portuguese harbor strong feelings, positive or negative. A more detached perspective also exists. No opinion on them. I define them as people living in the country next door. Personally, have no affinity to them whatsoever, offered one Portuguese individual, suggesting a spectrum of views beyond admiration or frustration. This persistent, if unreciprocated, interest is evident in media coverage. While Spanish media largely ignores Portugal, Portuguese news often highlights even mundane Spanish events. Every January 6th, the news speak about how Reyes is celebrated in Spain and how Spanish kids receive their gifts that day, notes one observer, showcasing a persistent, if unreciprocated, interest.
The rivalry, though often sublimated in daily interactions, flares up intensely in competitive arenas, particularly football. During matches between the two nations, the underlying tensions and historical resentments can erupt, transforming into a playful yet deeply felt "We W3." This passionate outpouring of national pride, often expressed with fervent chants and good-natured animosity, serves as a release valve for centuries of complex relations. While direct name-calling between the two cultures is less prominent than, say, the Spanish use of gabachos for the French, a term reflecting a similar looking-down attitude that Spaniards themselves have experienced, there are subtle jabs. For instance, the Portuguese, with their generally higher English proficiency due to subtitled media, might playfully or pointedly mock the bad English skills of some Spaniards, a mild form of linguistic one-upmanship.
The overarching dynamic, however, is best captured by the older sibling, younger sibling analogy. From the Portuguese perspective, Spain is the older sibling who loves the younger sibling, but is kind of a jerk and tends to mostly ignore him. Portugal, the younger sibling, admires and observes Spain, often with a mix of pride and frustration at being largely overlooked. This complex emotional landscape is vividly captured by a Portuguese perspective on the older sibling. You've accomplished a lot on your own, but you will always be fascinated by your older sibling. You're proud of your older sibling, and you mention your sibling here and there. You tell your sibling you hate him, but you deeply admire him. Even minor differences, like the time zone discrepancy, a topic touched upon in Chapter 3, can be framed as a stupid sibling quarrel, highlighting how even small distinctions become part of the complex dynamic. And, like any siblings, there are historical grievances, such as the long-standing Olivenza dispute, detailed further in Chapter 5, which can be seen as the sibling stealing stuff from the other. Yet, despite these perceived slights, the underlying connection is undeniable. The allowance of double nationality between Spain and Portugal, a policy elaborated in Chapter 5, stands as a testament that, beneath the surface of perceived ignoring, there is a deep, often unspoken understanding and a capacity for getting along very well. This analogy encapsulates the complex emotional landscape, a deep-seated connection born of shared history and geography, yet strained by a perceived imbalance of power, attention, and mutual respect. This isn't just about simple misunderstandings. It's about the emotional weight of being perpetually compared, sometimes dismissed, and often ignored by a larger, more boisterous neighbor.
These stereotypes and caricatures, whether rooted in historical condescension or perceived arrogance, serve to simplify complex national identities. They create mental shortcuts that, while sometimes humorous, ultimately hinder deeper understanding.
They perpetuate a cycle of ignorance, where the invisible neighbor remains unseen, and the volatile sibling remains misunderstood. How then can these two nations, bound by so much history and geography, move beyond these ingrained perceptions to embrace a more nuanced, respectful, and truly reciprocal relationship. Chapter 5. Iberian Crossroads. Unity and Enduring Echoes. After centuries of intertwined yet often conflicting destinies, the modern Iberian Peninsula finds itself at a fascinating crossroads. While the historical narratives, deep-seated rivalries, and subtle cultural distinctions explored in previous chapters continue to resonate, they now play out against a backdrop of increasing integration and a shared European identity. Today, Spain and Portugal are not just ancient neighbors. They are partners within the European Union, allies in NATO, Portugal a founding member, Spain joining in 1982, and members of the Eurozone, bound by a myriad of institutional ties that actively foster cooperation. This era marks a gradual, sometimes uneven, shift from a past defined by competition to a present striving for resurgence, hand in hand. The institutional framework of the European Union has, perhaps more than any other factor, compelled a profound shift in how Spain and Portugal interact. Gone are the days when military skirmishes over contested territories were a real threat. Now their leaders meet regularly at Iberian summits, discussing a wide range of issues from economic policy to environmental challenges. They cooperate closely on issues like combating drug trafficking and managing the devastating forest fires that plague the peninsula each summer. We've seen their solidarity in action, such as when Portugal's Prime Minister Antonio Costa fiercely defended Spain against critical comments from a Dutch finance minister, labeling them repugnant. This was not just diplomatic courtesy, it was a clear signal of a shared destiny and mutual support within the European family. Evidence of this deepening cooperation is plentiful. The Albufeira Convention, signed in 1998, meticulously governs the equitable use of transboundary rivers like the Douro, Tagus, and Guadiana, a crucial agreement for shared water resources. In a display of symbolic unity and practical ambition, both nations have launched joint bids to host the FIFA World Cup, including an unsuccessful attempt for 2018 or 2022, and a current bid for 2030, presenting a united front on the global stage. More recently, the solemn reopening of their shared border after the COVID-19 pandemic closures, followed by a new treaty of friendship and cooperation in 2021, underscored their commitment to a future of collaboration. These agreements extend to practical matters like managing fish and game in the international Minho River border and establishing a statute for cross-border workers, which was part of the 2021 treaty, recognizing the fluid movement of people and commerce. However, moving beyond centuries of ingrained perceptions isn't simply a matter of signing treaties. The psychological landscape, shaped by historical narratives and stereotypes, remains complex, and not all modern encounters are free of friction. While the Olivenza dispute was a historical grievance, it continues to be a lingering modern territorial dispute, with Portugal maintaining its claim to the territory. Beyond land, a modern dispute over the exclusive economic zone, EEZ, around the Savage Islands, an uninhabited Portuguese archipelago, exemplifies continued friction over maritime resources. Environmental concerns also surface, as seen in Portugal's complaints to the EU regarding Spain's Almaraz nuclear power plant and its proposed nuclear waste warehouse near the border, highlighting cross-border impact concerns. These instances, while managed through diplomatic channels rather than military confrontation, serve as reminders that even within a framework of cooperation, national interests and historical sensitivities can still lead to disagreement. Despite these lingering shadows and occasional disputes, cross-border interactions at a grassroots level are a vibrant testament to the resilience of shared culture and practicality. Along border areas in Extremadura, a unique linguistic blend known as Portuñol or Portuñol in Portuguese spontaneously emerges.
This informal, improvised mixture of Portuguese and Spanish serves as a fluid, adaptable communication strategy, a survival tool for travelers and workers, and sometimes even a cultural marker of border identity. It's a testament to human adaptability, enabling conversation, commerce, and connection where formal linguistic barriers might otherwise exist.
Beyond the borders, increasing numbers of Portuguese immigrants in Spain also contribute to a growing, albeit often quiet, cultural exchange. There are 97,628 Portuguese in Spain, 19% of whom live in Madrid. These communities, while integrating into Spanish society, maintain their language and traditions, subtly weaving Portuguese threads into the broader Spanish cultural fabric. This organic movement of people, driven by economic opportunities and shared Iberian heritage, creates new points of contact and understanding, far removed from the historical rivalries of old. Innovation in language learning and cultural exchange has been spurred by the close linguistic ties. Digital platforms now offer unprecedented resources for cross-linguistic study, allowing Spanish speakers to train their ears to Brazilian news podcasts or European Portuguese YouTube channels and vice versa. Language exchange partnerships flourish, creating opportunities for individuals to bridge the gap with patience, slower speech, and a willingness to understand. These personal connections often transcend mere language learning, blossoming into lasting friendships and cultural bridges that enrich both participants' understanding of the broader Ibero-American world. A tangible symbol of this evolving relationship is the allowance of double nationality between Spain and Portugal, recognizing the practical reality of cross-border living and a shared hybrid identity for many. This policy, extended to few other countries, signifies a profound recognition of their intertwined destinies. The narrative of Spain and Portugal is no longer solely one of rivalry, but increasingly one of resurgence. It's a complex tapestry woven from threads of deep historical connection, pragmatic modern cooperation, and the persistence of distinct identities. The challenge now lies in transforming perceived indifference into active interest, and historical rivalry into genuine mutual understanding. As the Iberian Peninsula continues to navigate its shared future, the ongoing dialogue between these two nations will define whether their path leads to an even deeper integration, or if the echoes of their past will continue to shape their present. So, we've journeyed through centuries of shared Iberian roots, witnessing how Spain and Portugal forged distinct paths from common origins. From divergent empires and tricky linguistic nuances to contrasting cultural rhythms and persistent stereotypes, their relationship is a complex tapestry. Yet, today, amidst EU integration and growing cross-border ties, they navigate a future of increasing cooperation. Their story isn't just about two nations, it's a powerful reminder of how history shapes identity, and how even the closest neighbors must actively bridge divides to truly understand each other. The question remains, can the echoes of their past fully give way to a harmonious future? Thank you for listening.